Welcome to the IoT podcast Cybersecurity mini-series special. I'm your host, Katie White, Head of Research and Partnerships at the IoT podcast, powered by 5V Media. Today, I'm joined by David Rogers, CEO at Copper Horse, a software and security company based in Windsor, UK. In the episode, we discuss why there has been a slow uptake to cybersecurity practices by companies, and we also get into advice for companies that may not be employing the security measures that they should, and the potential detriments of this. Hi, David. Welcome to the IoT podcast. We're on our special episode at the IT Security Foundation 9th annual conference. So to start, would you be able to give our audience a bit of information on your background, what you do, and what Copper Horse is all about?
Yeah, so my name's David Rogers. I own a company called Copper Horse, and we specialize in very difficult and interesting security problems in the cybersecurity space. Everything from mobile to IoT to automotive and everything in between.
And you've got a car simulator upstairs, which I'm definitely going to have a go on later. Can you chat a bit more about that? What's that all about?
Yeah. So we do a lot of research into interesting problems in the future. So we've been looking at connected car security for a long time. And what we did during the pandemic actually was to build our own car hacking simulator with a real car network attached to various different simulators and allow people to experience what it's like to be hacked while they're driving along. And it's quite interesting to see how people react.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely be getting some filming in with that, and it will be my first time on a car simulator, so I'm interested to see how that goes. But so what? Obviously, we're in 2023, almost going into 2024. What innovations have you seen in IoT this year? But also, what lessons have you learned, or is there anything that you've seen that you think is still ongoing challenge? Obviously, we're at the IoT Security Foundation, so security probably is on top of mind.
Well, the biggest thing for me, so I'm the original author of the UK's Code of Practice, which for IoT security in the consumer space. And so I've been working on this domain for many, many years with the mobile industry, for hardware security, right through to how we actually fix IoT in the future. And I guess the problem that we've got is that things aren't changing a lot. So today at the conference, actually, we're launching our annual report into the state of vulnerability disclosure in the consumer space. And we found that around about 76% of IoT manufacturers don't have any way for hackers or security researchers to contact them.
Wow.
And that's crucially important this year because come 2024, in the UK, for example, the end of April, it'll be illegal, essentially, to not have that mechanism in place. So I would have thought that we'd have seen maybe this massive uptick in manufacturers adopting vulnerability disclosure as part of basic measures of cybersecurity measures on IoT security, and they just haven't done it. We even widened the scope of our work. So originally we took 330 IoT manufacturers, and we widened that by another 108, I think, this year. And actually what we found was the situation was even worse than we thought. So last year we predicted that if it continued at the current trend that it is, it would take until 2049 for vendors to be fully compliant if we wanted to get to that 100%. And what we're finding is even longer, which is really disturbing. And also justifies to me that the action that we took in the UK and also around the world was the right action. You know, you need to have regulation because these companies can't be allowed to be left to their own devices. We've got a few kind of headline companies that we all know and love, and the products, from Amazon or Apple or Google. But that actually represents, a small part of the overall market. And there's a lot of kind of rubbish IoT out there that's not getting any better. But unfortunately, people don't know that, and they're not being told what that kind of stuff is.
So do you think the reason for the slow uptake is to do with the regulations, or is there any other factors that you've seen?
I think that these companies are just doing what they've always done, which is the absolute bare minimum to nothing. And so the reason that we started this report in the first place was that there are very few ways of being able to actually measure the security of a product without going into quite a lot of technical detail. But we know now that we want to have vulnerability disclosure policies, and they have to publicly state that on their website. So it's what I call an insecurity canary, because if it's not there, then you know that probably there's a lot of other issues in that company. So it's one of the few ways we can measure it. So and quite easily. So we have this kind of list of sort of green companies that have passed the sort of threshold test in our report, where they're basically compliant. But then we got this whole massive pages and pages of red list companies that are doing nothing. And like I say, I think it's sort of ambivalence or willful ignorance in some cases that they think they can carry on and nobody's going to stop them shipping these products. Well, I've got news for them. From April 29th next year, the UK is not going to allow the sale of these products, and that's going to protect millions of consumers in the country.
And I think definitely like reports like yours, like the key thing is like awareness, making these companies aware of the repercussions. And
yeah, I mean, so we actually also, a lot of the work that we do as well, we publish as open data. And what that means is that we put a Creative Commons 4.0 license on it so that anybody can take that information and use it. And we find that's actually, we get a lot of feedback saying that's really, really useful, because, you know, why should we just sit on that data? Like, if we can, you know, we've finished with that now, so we can let other companies use it. So for example, that whole red list, if I was a manufacturer on that red list, I'd be a bit worried, because obviously the regulator can just take that red list and go straight to those companies and go, well, why haven't you done this? And then they can start the conversation about, well, what about the other things? Like, why have you still got default passwords in your webcams or whatever it is?
Yeah, thank you so much for those insights, David. So that leads me quite nicely on to my next question. So what can we expect for 2024? What are your predictions?
Well, I'm expecting a lot of upheaval and a lot of complaining from some of these companies, where they say, "Oh, we never knew this was coming, and you know, this is all too punitive, and you know, we've done nothing wrong." I think that's really what's going to happen. But of course, you know, that's completely divorced from reality. You know, the first IoT Security Foundation conference in 2015, we highlighted all of these issues. So that will be nearly 10 years from the start of that work, and there was work going on before, right? So these problems have been in these connected products from the 1990s in some cases, right? So these companies can't say that they didn't know this was coming unless they like literally don't read anything. And then you're going to say, well, if that's how poor they are, then really, do these companies really deserve to be in business? Because what they're selling is harm. If you're a young mother who's bought a baby webcam that's insecure and you don't know anything about that at all, and you can't make any kind of relevant purchasing decision, then basically that company is selling you harm if someone else can get into that baby webcam and shout at your baby and things like that. And that's just one tiny example. There's lots of other harm that can be caused by these connected products. And that's why governments are worried about it, because that connected product can be turned around and maybe harnessed into a botnet and targeted against, you know, governments or against websites en masse.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk around like the consumer side, isn't it? Like when individual people who don't have any idea about the vulnerabilities that are at stake as well, like what advice would you give to companies that are maybe not employing the security measures that they should?
Yeah, so first of all, don't be scared, because it can seem like this kind of massive nightmare. You know that you're in a position where you haven't done anything about security, and you might think, well, that is pure cost. You know, as a business owner, you say that is just more regulatory cost for me, and I'm a small business maybe, or a startup, and I just simply can't afford to invest in that. So I would say kind of like, don't panic, but step back from that and think about where you might be in, say, 5 years' time. So nobody knows about your product right now, but in 5 years' time, if you plan to be successful, you might have millions of devices out there. So the decisions that you make now are really key to that, because if you don't make the right decision on security, like other technology decisions you're making, is you're basically buying debt. And that security debt will come to fruition in 5 years' time, and it will cost you millions and millions of dollars potentially in fines or in lost custom, or potentially you could go out of business. So if you think your product's going to be successful, then the natural conclusion of that in your internal conversation is that you've got to do something about security. So then your next step is, okay, well, what are the basic steps? So in the UK, the regulation will say no default passwords, and it also say have a vulnerability disclosure policy, and it'll also say be transparent about software updates. Actually, that's not too difficult, really, is it? So if you can concentrate on those three things to begin with, and then build out from there, and then also the stuff that you can't do, fine, you can't do them right now. You might not have the money or whatever, but start to write a roadmap. When are you going to do that on your product security roadmap? And those are the first steps, and then you can gradually build your product. Maybe you've got a product that's already out there. And you go, well, I'm going to have to replace the hardware maybe. So what you could do is say, well, make a risk-based decision. If it's not total rubbish, then maybe you could say, well, at the end of this generation of this product, then we're going to evolve to a more secure hardware platform, and then set a date for that, and then work out how you're going to work towards that. And I think when you start to think like that, it's a bit more, it breaks it down, and it makes it a little bit more palatable than the whole of the problem, and thinking about it that way.
Yeah, so it's like security first through every step, basically.
And that's really the sort of basis of secure by design, and also secure by default. And there's lots of advice and guidance out there. I think people just equate security to cost, and I don't think that's the case at all. A lot of things can come for free or through basic engineering decisions that are not going the wrong direction.
Thank you for that, David. So my last question for you on the podcast today is, well, at the 9th Annual IT Security Foundation Conference, and the theme this year is around AI, so securing IoT in the era of AI. Obviously, AI has been a very hyped buzzword this year. We've had Generation AI come in, affecting all industries' workflow. So what are your thoughts on securing IT in the era of AI?
So I think the key thing for me, and I'm looking at a lot of these future problems, is actually, what is IoT broadly doing here? IoT is that entry point to an AI-enabled system. And actually, the biggest challenge for AI is often data quality. So if you are an IoT provider, think about, well, the sensor data that I'm picking up, is that actually qualitative? And what I mean by that is the data, integrity okay? Is it actually picking up the right data? So if you've got a temperature sensor, is the tolerance of that something like plus or minus 2 degrees or something? So think about how that might be ingested in the future, and think about, what questions might be asked in the future. So is it safe from being manipulated? Could I remove that sensor, and instead of sending temperature values, I start sending some kind of letters or some random data? So sensor integrity in the world of AI is absolutely key to data integrity and data quality in AI, enabling AI to make sensible decisions. And I think that's really the role of IoT in the AI ecosystem. So whoever creates those kind of sensors and pieces of equipment that can be relied upon, then they're going to be winning in the marketplace.
Do you see any sort of challenges around AI? Like the last person I was speaking to, John, he was completely against the whole AI security situation. Like, what do you? Well, there's always going to be vulnerabilities within anything you do, but what are your thoughts on that?
So I think there's a number of challenges. So obviously the way that the models are built, in theory can be manipulated. So, can you trust the actual model itself? That's a big challenge that we've got. I think, we don't I'm not in the camp that we need to be fully scared about this, but what we do have problems with is sort of work in isolation. So in a place, for example, with the boundary between the real world and the virtual world, so the AI world, so as I was saying around receiving sensor data, if that doesn't match what the real world is doing, and the AI world creates a different version of what the real world is, and then that diverge, that's a big problem. And it might be that somebody's deliberately manipulating it to create a misrepresentation of the real world. But also where different AI systems kind of go out of control. And this is just a control theory issue, but we've seen it before with things like pricing algorithms, where they'll compete against each other. And you'll see things like books being sold for $5 million or something. And that's really the outcome of a pricing algorithm. Or when there's a hurricane and then prices of flights go out of control. So the mathematics behind that, which is control theory, they need to be applied to these spaces. And we need to pay a lot of attention to that transition between the real world and the virtual world, and where there's machine to machine manipulation. That's a real concern for me.
Yeah, it will definitely be interesting to see how it all pans out. Been great speaking with you today, David. Where can our audience find out more about you and Copper Horse?
Very simple. Go to copperhorse.co.uk and follow me on Twitter. It's drogers UK.
Thank you very much.